Close your eyes for a second. Picture London, 1878. Your city runs on gas. Every night, a lamplighter walks your street with a long pole, touching flame to each lamp, one by one. Your house smells faintly of oil. Your eyes ache from reading by candlelight. After dark, the world simply stops. Now picture this. A man in Newcastle, England, stands before a packed lecture hall, holds up a thin glass tube, and with a single click, the room fills with cold white light. Not fire, not flame, pure electric light. The crowd goes silent. That was February 3rd, 1879. 700 people in a room, and the man holding the bulb was not Thomas Edison. I'm Aiden Thomas of Hidden History, and this is how humanity chose when to see in the dark. This is the history of the light bulb. Before we get to Edison, before we get to the man in that lecture hall, we need to understand what life in darkness actually looked like, because we've almost completely forgotten. For most of human history, night was the enemy. Candles and oil lamps were expensive, unreliable, and genuinely dangerous. Every year, thousands of homes burned to the ground because of open flames. Cities, even great cities like London and Paris, simply went dark after sunset. And then in 1802, something changed, or almost changed. Humphry Davy was a British chemist with a reckless appetite for experimentation, the kind of man who inhaled nitrous oxide, laughing gas, just to see what happened in front of an audience. That year at the Royal Institution in London, Davy ran current through a thin strip of platinum and made it glow. It was the first incandescent light in history. It was also almost useless, dim and gone in seconds. Davy wasn't finished. 6 years later, he built something far more dramatic. A battery bank of roughly 2,000 cells wired to two carbon rods held slightly apart. When he brought them close, electricity leapt the gap, and the room exploded with a blinding arc of light. He called it the electric arc lamp. By most accounts, it was the brightest artificial light a human being had ever seen. But here's the catch. It was useless as a household light. It burned too hot to bring indoors, and it needed 2,000 batteries just to run for a few minutes. It was proof of concept, not a product. The race was on, and it would take another 70 years to cross the finish line. Between 1802 and 1879, there were more than 24 documented patents for electric light, filed by inventors in Britain, Germany, France, Canada, and the United States, all racing to solve the same problem. The problem was never light. Davy had already proven electricity could produce it. The problem was time. How do you keep a filament, the thin thread inside the bulb, going long enough to be useful without it burning out? In 1840, a British astronomer named Warren de la Rue coiled a platinum filament inside a sealed vacuum tube and ran current through it. It worked. It glowed for hours. But platinum was, and still is, one of the most expensive metals on Earth. A beautiful, completely unaffordable dead end. By the 1870s, inventors worldwide were converging on a cheaper answer, a carbon filament, sealed in a glass bulb with oxygen pumped out. No oxygen, no combustion. The filament glows instead of burning away. Joseph Swan was a British chemist from Sunderland, a quiet, methodical man who had been working on electric light since the 1850s. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't a showman. He was just relentlessly good at chemistry. On February 3rd, 1879, the night you saw at the top of this video, and 8 months before Edison filed his American patent, Swan demonstrated a working carbon filament bulb to 700 people at the Literary and Philosophical Society of Newcastle. The room erupted. Swan's own home in Gateshead became the first private residence in the world lit by electric bulbs. 3 years later, London's Savoy Theatre became the first public building lit entirely by electricity. Over 1,200 of Swan's lamps, placing gas fixtures that had been cooking the audience in heat and foul air. And Thomas Edison? Still working on his version 4,000 miles away in Menlo Park, New Jersey. Edison filed his U.S. patent application on November 4, 1879, and it was granted that January. He had something Swan didn't: legal firepower, press connections, and a genius for owning a story that wasn't entirely his. Swan sued. The two men fought a bruising patent battle in British courts, and in 1883, rather than keep bleeding each other, they merged the companies into one: Edison and Swan United Electric Light Company. Everyone just called it Ediswan. The man who invented the light bulb and the man who convinced the world he invented it, they ended up splitting the profits and sharing the shelves. But neither of them is the man I actually want to tell you about. Lewis Howard Latimer was born in Chelsea, Massachusetts on September 4th, 1848. His parents had escaped slavery in Virginia 6 years earlier. His father, George Latimer, fled north with his pregnant wife, Rebecca, hidden aboard a ship and was arrested in Boston days after they arrived. His case exploded into one of the most famous fugitive slave trials in the country. Frederick Douglass spoke at the rallies held to raise money for his freedom. A statewide petition with over 64,000 signatures helped push Massachusetts to pass what became known as the Latimer Law in 1843, one of the first laws in the country barring state officials from helping capture fugitive slaves. Lewis grew up free, but without wealth, without connections, without a formal education. He taught himself technical drafting while working as an office boy at a Boston patent law firm. He was so good at it that in 1876, Alexander Graham Bell personally hired him to draft the patent drawings for the telephone. That bears repeating. The diagrams that secured one of the most valuable patents in American history were drawn by a self-taught son of formerly enslaved parents working late nights at a law firm desk. But it's what Latimer did next that changed the light bulb forever. Edison's original carbon filaments had a serious problem. By most accounts, they burned out in well under 100 hours, and they were fragile and expensive to make. You cannot light a city on a bulb that dies before the week is out. In September 1881, working for one of Edison's direct rivals, Latimer co-patented a new method for manufacturing carbon filaments. Patent 247,097. 4 months later, he patented an improved version alone, patent 252,386, process of manufacturing carbons. His filaments were more consistent, more durable, and dramatically cheaper. Electric light stopped being a rich person's toy and started being something a city could afford everywhere. In 1884, Edison, never too proud to hire the best, brought Latimer onto his team. Latimer went on to write the first textbook ever published on electric lighting in 1890. And in 1918, at 69 years old, Latimer was inducted into the Edison Pioneers, the honorary circle of engineers credited with building the modern electric age. He was the first person of color ever admitted. 34 years. That's how long that door took to open. And yet, if you walk through most histories of the light bulb today, Latimer's name still doesn't appear at all. But even Latimer stood on someone's shoulders. Because before you can build a light, you have to understand what light actually is. That understanding was established almost 800 years earlier in Cairo. Ibn al-Haytham, known in the West as al-Haytham, was an 11th century polymath placed under house arrest in Egypt for years. With nothing to do but think, he wrote the Kitab al-Manazir, the Book of Optics. In it, he was the first to correctly argue that we see because light reflects off objects and into our eyes, not as the Greeks believed, thinking our eyes emit light outward. He described refraction, built an early camera obscura, and laid down the basic method of experimental science centuries before Bacon or Galileo. Without that understanding of how light behaves, nobody could have calculated how it moves inside a glass envelope, or how to build a working vacuum around a glowing filament. The light bulb's intellectual DNA runs back to a house arrest in 11th century Cairo. By the mid-1880s, the bulb itself was basically solved. The next fight wasn't about the bulb, it was about how to power millions of them at once. In September 1882, Edison switched on the Pearl Street station in Lower Manhattan, the world's first commercial power plant. Day one, it lit around 400 lamps for 82 paying customers across roughly a square mile. Extraordinary. And also, direct current, DC, which loses massive energy over distance. Edison's former employee, Nikola Tesla, and the industrialist George Westinghouse were building something better. Alternating current, AC, which could travel for miles with far less loss. Edison's whole business was built on direct current, so he ran a public fear campaign funding demonstrations designed to convince Americans that alternating current was too dangerous to let into their homes. It didn't work. Alternating current was simply better physics. By 1893, it powered the World's Fair in Chicago. Edison lost the War of the Currents so completely that the company still carrying his name, reorganized into General Electric, switched to AC anyway, with or without him. By the 1920s, incandescent bulbs were good. Too good, according to the company selling them. In December 1924, executives from the world's biggest light bulb makers, General Electric, Germany's Osram, the Netherlands' Philips, and others, met in Geneva and formed the Phoebus Cartel, officially a standards body. Unofficially, its real purpose was to cap the lifespan of every incandescent bulb sold worldwide at exactly 1,000 hours. Engineers who built longer-lasting bulbs were fined. It's one of the earliest and most deliberate examples of planned obsolescence in the industrial history. A global handshake to make a product worse on purpose so people kept buying it. The cartel dissolved with World War II, but the same instinct didn't die with it. It just found a new look. Osram, one of the original 1924 cartel members, spent the 2010s selling a smart bulb called Lightify. Bulbs you could dim, schedule, and control from your phone. In 2021, Osram simply turned off the cloud servers those bulbs depended on. The smart features people paid extra for went dark, permanently. Same company, same instinct, a century apart. A cartel agreement traded for a server shutdown, which is what makes one particular light bulb in one particular fire station in Livermore, California, such a perfect middle finger to hundreds of years of that thinking. The Centennial Light was hand-built around 1900 by the Shelby Electric Company, using a thick carbon filament and old-fashioned blown glass, years before anyone agreed to make bulbs that failed on a schedule. It was installed in the firehouse in 1901, and with only a handful of brief interruptions, it has been burning ever since. It has its own live camera feed. It has outlasted at least 3 webcams pointed at it. This July, it quietly passed 125 years of being switched on. Nobody engineered that bulb to last a century. It just wasn't engineered to fail. There's a difference. Today, that fight is being replaced again. LEDs use a fraction of power incandescent bulbs do, last tens of thousands of hours instead of 1,000, and several countries have already started phasing incandescents out of storage for good. That should be the happy ending. Mostly it is. But the smart balls riding in alongside that shift carry a new version of the same old catch. They're not just glass and metal anymore. They're glass, metal, and somebody else's server, which means somebody else gets to decide when your light stops working. Thomas Edison was a genius. His real genius was never the light bulb. It was the system. In September 1882, he didn't just sell New York a light. He sold the wire, the switch, the meter, the socket, the entire infrastructure of the modern world. Buy a smart bulb today, and you're still buying into somebody's system, their app, their servers, their decision for how long your light gets to work. The light itself? That was Humphry Davy who proved it was possible, Warren de la Rue who showed how, Joseph Swan who got there first, and Lewis Latimer who made it last long enough and cheap enough for the rest of us to use. It was never one man's brilliant invention. It was a system built on the shoulders of people history keeps forgetting to remember. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Hidden History. If so, hit that subscribe button, like the video, give us a hype, subscribe to our email, and comment below on another episode you'd like to see. Next week, we're starting a new trilogy on clothing. Next week, we're going to start with your feet and how you protect them. Next week, we are covering the history of shoes. Now, take a look around. History is everywhere.